It may be a delicate balance, John, but we need to make sure that people have quality accommodation in which to live, and standards shouldn't be substandard. I think this story is interesting because what we've seen here is a massive increase, a very significant increase in the number of rental properties that are undergoing inspection by the local authority. If we take Galway City Council, between 2022 and 2024, we've seen a five-fold increase in the number of rental properties that have been inspected. We've gone up from 133 to 705. And the Minister in his comments at the weekend has committed more funding to this area, an additional 10 million, which is very welcome. I'm a bit confused by what I read on RT of Deputy O'Brien's position, because he's asking that a quarter of all rented properties would be inspected. But we're beyond that now. We're up at a third across the country. We're seeing that there was 80,000 inspections last year, and there's about 250,000 rental properties registered with the PTSB, with the Residential Tenancy Board. So, look, I think we're moving in the right direction on this. I don't think we can let the standard fall. I think we need to keep pressure on. And it is important that, you're right, John, we do need to make sure that the rental market plays a part in facilitating the accommodation needs of the people. But we also do need to make sure that the standards are high in those rental accommodations.
Because I know that government has taken a lot of flack from opposition in terms of removing the eviction ban a few years ago. But also, if that 2% cap was removed, there could be more pressure on government from opposition. And it may not go down well with lots of sectors of the public, particularly the rental sector.
There's bound to be pressure on government. There's massive pressure on government, John. I'm applying pressure on government because this housing situation, we need resolutions to it. What I find interesting, though, and it's amazed me really, that for some time the opposition have been demanding of the government that they would implement the recommendations of the Housing Commission report. Among the recommendations of the Housing Commission report is that we would review that legislation. Now, I understand that the Housing Agency have undertaken that review, and they're going to bring suggestions and recommendations to government on that. But that was a recommendation of the Housing Commission review, or the review of the Housing Commission, to see if we can increase the security of tenure for rented accommodation, and also try and see, is there better ways to regulate the market price. Again, the housing recommendation, the report of the Commission is to recommend that. The government acts on that. The opposition were demanding the government would act on the recommendation of the Housing Commission report. When the government did that, the opposition changed their minds and they said that no, we shouldn't do that. So look, I think the government will always be under pressure, but I think the Housing Commission report is important. There are recommendations in it that we have to look at and see, can they help, and the government are committed to it.
Or not meeting the targets here in Galway when it comes to delivery of affordable and social homes as well.
Yeah, John, I mean, look, I think Mairead's contribution there has kind of highlighted to me again the kind of scattergun approach of Sinn Féin to housing. We started on one conversation, there was a question, and Mairead went from the tenants in situ scheme to, the standards of rental accommodation to, other issues there that were raised. And I'd like to address them all. Certainly the tenants in situ scheme, I'm very happy to address that. The scheme continues to exist. I don't recall the opposition being appreciative of it before the election as it happens. I think it was critical of it. The scheme still exists. People can still avail of it. But there have been changes, and they've been brought about for good reason. A review had to take place as to whether we could house more people through funding through a different mechanism. And while the tenant in situ scheme did and will continue to stop people entering into homelessness, the review did also say that if more of that funding was put into direct bills or purchasing accommodation through other means, we might house more people. That has to be accepted as a good thing, or as a positive in the review of the tenant in situ scheme. And also, John, the point you made to me there before we finished about cost rental, of course it's more important that we get more cost rental, and we do have to see more of it in Galway City and County. And again, some of the resources that might have gone into the tenant in situ scheme might be better placed in advancing more cost rental schemes across the city and county. We've seen some of them. We've seen recently one in Barna for 10 houses. We've seen one on the Mona Bay Road. We do need to see more of them, and of course we're looking forward to further developments on the Mona Bay Road of further cost rental homes in the near future. But everything here must be evaluated, and the review of the tenant in situ scheme. I think we will see more people being housed by the use of those resources being used elsewhere.
And is enough being done to unlock land to get that level of investment in housing we have? I know certain taxes have been brought in to incentivise people to develop on land, but do they go far enough, Deputy Connolly?
Well, one mantra that Taoiseach has said since we've got elected is the importance of generating private investment in housing. Most housing that's being developed now, John, is either fully government sponsored or has some investment from government. For some reason, and it's difficult to assess it, but for some reason, the private sector are not investing in housing the way they would have done in the past. And that is being reviewed by the government. There's some contention over that, I think, between government parties. We have different opinions as to how we might do that. But look, I'm hoping that soon we will come up with measures to try and make sure that the private investment is triggered that will develop and see more development of housing. But of course, John, the planning issue is significant there as well. The infrastructure issue is significant. Minister Chambers has said that he is now looking at developing a infrastructural oversight committee within the Department of Public Expenditure to make sure that the things that are blocking infrastructural development are dealt with in a shorter time frame. The planning issues, the procurement issues, they're taking too long. And I'm very hopeful that Minister Chambers, when he does get that committee up and running, I think it's the Infrastructure Activation Office, when that gets going, that we will see a lot of those blockages being taken away that will facilitate greater development of housing.
John Connolly, Deputy Farrell mentioned there about government rowing back and some of the things they've said in the past. And one of the more recent ones is the housing czar. I know government came under pressure about the alleged salary that they would get. Is government feeling that sort of pressure in regard to housing? And was that wise to roll back on the housing czar at this point?
Well, I suppose, again, just to say a couple of things of what Mairead has said, John, if you don't mind. I suppose she questioned the necessity for the infrastructure activation of the infrastructure task force, but then went on to detail precisely why we need it in terms of the land within parts of this city not being available for development because we need new infrastructure there. And that committee will specifically look at those issues. So while I feel Mairead says we don't need the committee, she then clearly outlined why we do need the committee, and we do. And it will be a good task force. And I'm very hopeful that it will provide results in the short to medium term in terms of opening up land. I suppose on the Housing Activation Office, it is again a recommendation of the Housing Commission report that such an office will be established. It seemed to be recognised universally before the election by other parties who had it in their manifesto too, that we needed that recommendation of the Housing Commission to be enacted. The government commenced that, and the government are determined to do that. Unfortunately, it seemed to me that there was somebody who they felt would do the job well or would lead up the area. That person has now indicated they don't want to do that or they're not interested in the job. It's important that the government continue on to establish that office because it will be an important office. And as I said, it's a recommendation of the Housing Commission report. It was universally agreed, I felt, before the election that it should happen, but now we see some criticism of it again. But it is important we do it. It's important we do it right. It's important we clearly define the role. We clearly define the skills of the people we need to oversee the office, and that we make sure that they are seen to do their work in a way that the public can recognise, and it's evident that they're making progress.
And should the salary be close to $500,000?
It sounds excessive to me, John, to be frank. So it does. I think the issue there was that the preferred candidate was already a public sector employee who had a certain salary level, and if they wanted to make sure they got that person, that salary had to be matched. But it does sound excessive, and it would be, as I said at the outset, the important thing for me is that the office gets established and the person who oversees the office does their job well, because we need it. We need to make sure that this office gets up and going and gets down to work, and the public can have confidence in it.
You want to respond to some of the comments we had in, Deputy Connolly, but also, I suppose, back to that point on the mandatory inspections and certificate for all private rental properties. I know that Deputy O'Brien said the government should ensure that 25% of all property in the rental sector is inspected and certified every year. Is that possible?
Well, as I said in my comments earlier, John, we're surpassing that at the moment. Last year there were 80,000 inspections. There are about 250,000 houses registered with the Private Residential Tenancies Board. So we're actually surpassing that. And I believe it important that we continue in that vein, that we get as many houses inspected, registered and certified for the private market as possible. So it is possible, and we're actually gone beyond that. I suppose just in relation to some of the comments, again, this is such a varied area, and if you think of the discussion we've just had there from social housing schemes, the rental market, to private standards, to standards of private rental market, we went on to talk about infrastructure, housing activation office. It's very varied. And again, I'm not an expert on it all. And I agree with Mairead. We do need to get experts in this area, and that's why those offices are so important, and we try and get them up and running as soon as possible. And I think somebody else said, when is somebody going to press the button? And that's why we do need a housing activation office and an infrastructure task force, because we need a lot of buttons to be pushed in this area.